Hi, greetings to you all. I am Abiot Sagoya, live in Nairobi, Kenya. Currently at Africa International University, which is located in Karen alongside the Dagoretti Tirad. And it's been a while since I have posted a video. So today we will continue reflecting on the biblical insights, which this YouTube channel is dedicated for. So to remind you on some of the topics that I have been dealing with, maybe just let me pick one of them. I don't know if you remember, we talked about which Bible is your Bible, a topic that was about what your Bible is actually. So today I will do the continuation of that biblical reflection. There are two unwise approaches to the Bible that we have in our hearts today. One is extreme certainty. Extreme certainty has to do with this. It has a tendency of ignoring the human involvement in the origin of the Bible and merely focuses on its divine origin. So the tendency is that the Bible is mainly originated divinely, and it totally disregards the historical facts of the Bible's history, of its origin, of its transmission, of its formation, of its preservation, and of its translation processes. So this is not a good and a wise approach. The second unwise approach to the Bible is an extreme skepticism. And now this one focuses, on the other hand, this is like it ignores the divine involvement of the Bible. It totally disregards the divine origin of the Bible's transmission, formation, and preservation. So both approaches need to be held in a balance. That is what I am attempting to do in this YouTube channel. Today's video is about the stages in the development of the Bible. How we got our Bible. The Bible you have in your hands. It could be a translation of your own mother tongue, or it could be other translation, because maybe you have a Greek or a Hebrew Bible in your hands, but it is wise to know its background, how we got it, how it reached to us. It is very good and worth knowing information. So wait here. I'll talk about the various stages of the development of the Bible. Keep here. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. So let's begin with the most important stage in the development of the Bible. This stage is the historical events themselves stage. So you read your Bible, you have lots of historical records in the Bible. So before these events, historical events, being recorded in a written form and reach to you in your Bible, they have a different stage. Okay, so these historical events themselves, the actual events stage, is very important and very crucial for our understanding of the Bible. So let me read it out. The foundation of the Bible lies in historical events that occurred in ancient times. Long ago, thousands of years, These events are often considered pivotal and formative for the religious and cultural identity of the communities involved. So when you read your Bible, you are reading historical events which were occurred thousands of years ago in the ancient times. So in the context of the Old Testament, these stages encompasses events such as the creation narrative. The creation narrative you read in the book of Genesis. So before the actual event, before the written stage, the writing stage, these actual events were occurred long ago. And then we have the other stage. Now the other stage is the oral stage. But before we move to the oral stage, let me add more information on this historical events themselves stage. Now, you may remember from your reading of the Bible, the history of the patriarchal narratives like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the Exodus from Egypt, the giving of the Mosaic law on Mount Sinai, and the establishment of the Davidic kingdom. These are among others. This all occurred historically before the writing stage. We'll talk about the stage even before the writing stage. We'll talk about it in a while. So these events were not initially recorded in a written form, but were experienced and witnessed and passed on orally from generation to generation. That's why we call it the oral tradition stage. We'll talk about it in a while. So the oral tradition was a primary means of preserving and transmitting the accounts of these significant events. These significant events are the historical events themselves stage. Even for the New Testament, before the writing of the Gospels, we have the historical events stage, the historical events themselves stage. This may include the events of the teaching of Jesus, his death and resurrection. And then we have the apostolic witness to these events and in the forms of oral tradition as well. So the historical reliability and the significance of these events has played a crucial role in shaping the religious beliefs and the practices of the communities that emerged around these events. So now this will lead us to the next stage in the development of the Bible. Now, the oral stage. The Bible was originated in an oral ancient culture. This is very important to know. The stories of the Bible that we talked about, the historical events themselves stage, I've talked about it. So these stories of the Bible were recited by the community and memorized and transmitted orally from generation to generation. Do you see how unwise to approach the Bible with an extreme certainty? That extreme certainty, the one that ignores the human involvement in the development of the Bible, that only focuses on the divine origin of the Bible. That is not wise. Now, what happened after the oral stage? And also be careful when you think about the ancient times. It's not like our today's culture where we have education, educational system and all that. So we have books, to read, books to go to, get information from. But that was not the practice of the ancient times. So they had the oral tradition, oral culture. So they would recite, they would memorize stories, and then transmit these stories to the generations, by spoken word. So after the oral stage, we now come to the writing stage. The writing stage. So this is the production of autographs or original writings. Now, this is what happened. There were scribes or writers who wrote the stories on various instruments, the stories which were recited, which were memorized by the communities and transmitted from generation to generation by the word of mouth, now being written by scribes. And remember this, they didn't have papers, so they used different instruments, various instruments to write on. For example, they wrote on stones, they wrote on wet clay, they wrote on poetry, and using different cutting tools to inscribe the texts, the oral stories, into writing the written documents. So, for example, the stone tablets, which you read in Exodus chapter 31, verses 18, it talks about the writing material that was used to write on the stone tablets, and the writing tools like the finger. For example, when Jesus was writing on the ground in John chapter 8, verse 6, John 8:6, Jesus was writing on the ground using his finger, okay, not using a pen or something else that we know today. So it is good to know that after the historical events themselves stage, now we have the oral stage where people recited and memorized and transmitted. That was for preserving and transmitting the stories, and then we have the writing stage where the scribes were producing a written document, and then they were writing on various instruments like stones, wet clay, and poetry to inscribe the texts. The scribes wrote the stories on papyrus. Now, the technology, it's a different technology in the writing stage of the Bible. It was on the stone, on the wet clay, poetry, then the development of the writing material now reached to the, something called papyrus. It was made from a plant that grows around Egypt, River Nile. And then another development in the instruments of writing material was the parchments. Parchments were made from sheep or goat skins. The scribes would use ink. Now it's another development of writing tool, an ink and a pen to write the texts of the Bible. Now the scribes were writing on scroll. Now scroll was a material that was developed during the writing stage of the Bible. The scroll would be unrolled to be read, and then remember, when you write on a scroll, you don't write it in the in and out. No, you don't write on the both sides of the page. You just write on one side of the page. That's why you unroll it and then you roll it back. So it was not written on both sides of the page. That is the scroll. So most of the Old Testament books were written on a scroll format. That's the Jewish format. Then there was another development, another technology that was developed during this writing stage. From clay, from stones, from wet clay, from poetry to papyrus, from papyrus to parchments, from parchments to now codex. Scribes wrote on codex. A codex is a book-like material where you write on both sides of the page. It was written on both sides of the page, and like we said earlier, the Old Testament, or almost all of the Old Testament books were written on scroll. The scribes wrote the New Testament on a codex format material, that is a book form material, the Christian format. That's the Christian format. So almost all of the New Testament books were written on a codex format. Now, this will lead us to the other stage. That is, okay, before we move to the other stage, we have to comment on this one. So there is something called original and a copy. So let me explain this. So the originals, by originals we mean the orthographs themselves. For example, when let's say if the oral tradition was turned into the writing, into a written document, the scribe would write one copy. So it's called the original, the orthograph, the one the scribe wrote it. Okay, the original writing, we call it the orthographs. Now, the orthographs were lost, and remember that this development of the Bible writing took some time. Not days, not weeks, not months, but years. Not 100 or 200, but thousands of years. Okay, so what happens to the written documents, the original, the first written documents? Okay, due to time and various causes, it could be natural, it could be human causes, all the original or the autographs were lost. They were lost. But before they were lost, they were copied. They were copied into a material. For example, a simple example would be like this. For example, if the scroll or the parchment or the codex gets old, a scribe would copy it into a new writing material, could be a new parchment, so that the old parchment will be done away because of age or because of damage. So what would you retain? You would retain a copy, not the original autograph, because the original autograph gets lost because of age. It could also be because of human caused damage. All right, now there is another stage in the development of the Bible. This stage is called copying stage. The copying stage now. That is the production of manuscripts, which is copies of copies of copies. What do I mean by that? The original documents, the autographs, were copied before they got lost. The copies were called manuscripts. The copies were copied. The copied were copied. So hence we have copies of copies of copies of copies. That's what we have today, not the original autographs. So we have hundreds of thousands of copies which contain differences among themselves. So no copy is similar in exact and accurate ways. So what does this mean? This has to do with a field in the Bible scholarship. It's called TC, that is text criticism. So that's a different subject, which I will come back to it in a future videos. But for now, remember that the original autographs were lost. But before they got lost, they were copied. And the copies were copied, the copies were copied. So now, okay, let me elaborate this a little. Okay, so now, for example, let's say Paul wrote, Paul wrote Galatians. Then he sent to the churches, many churches. So, for example, the question to ask is this: did Paul write one single original document, letter, then this letter being copied and distributed to these different ancient churches? Okay, if we say yes, then the other question is, let's say, how many members would be in each church? It could be many, right? And then if let's say someone wanted the copy of one of the church's letter, what would he do? He would copy it. And then somebody wants another copy. He would copy from the copy of the copy. And then he will continue doing that. So that's why that's the reason why we have thousands of copies today, which we call them manuscripts. And then there is an issue with this. When one person copies from another person, he would make changes, some intentional, some unintentional. Like I said, this is a whole different subject, which I will come back to it when I talk about text criticism. It's a big field in the Bible scholarship. So, now, ancient scribes were copyists of the Bible. Okay? Let's say, if someone believed that Genesis was written by Moses. So, Moses lived thousands of years before we have the copies. What does that mean? The generations that came after Moses, if we believe Moses wrote Genesis, do you think his first written document would last thousands of years? No. What happens? There were scribes who would copy, and then another scribe would come and copy from the copy. Why would he do that? To preserve it and to transmit it. So what happens? The original gets lost, then you remain with the copy, remain with another copy, the copy of copies. Okay, this saying might be a little bit complicated, but it will be clear maybe when we come to it in the other subject, which I'm promising to make a video about text criticism. So, the ancient scribes were copyists of the Bible. They were centered at a royal palaces and temples because these places were archives and libraries where written materials collected and stored. So, where would you find the documents of the written materials of the Bibles? And the palaces and the temple. So the temple was not just a worshiping place, but it was also serving as an archive and also a library for storing the Bible written materials. For example, Ezra was a scribe. If you remember in his book, Ezra chapter 7, verses 5 to 6, and even verse 10, you see how Ezra was a scribe. So the Hebrew Bible Copying evidences was evidenced from manuscripts of the 3rd and the 8th century AD. And then scribes were involved in a very difficult task as copyists. They should be carefully reproducing the exact writing. Okay? What happens when they were exhausted? What if they heard something but wrote something different mistakenly? So, like I said, I will come back to this when I make a video on text criticism. So when a scribe copies, there are different ways of copying. There will be an auditorium where the copyist would sit, somebody would read out the text, and the scribe would write it down. But the problem is when the person reading makes a mistake in his reading, the copyist would write exactly what he heard. Then you would have a mistake in copying. Or the person who was reading would read correctly, but the person who was copying would read differently, and he would write it. And then you will have an error in the writing, which we call this variants. Because when you compare different copies of the Bible or the manuscripts against each other, you'll have hundreds of thousands of differences, mostly differences of spellings, maybe differences of words, differences of expressions. Some of them are intentional, some of them are unintentional. Like I said, we'll come back to it in videos which I'm planning to do it in the future. Now let's come to the other stage. Now from writing stage to copying stage, now we come to the translation stage. So there are two stages in translation stage. Translation stage means reproducing the Bible in other languages. Now, which involves interpretation and paraphrasing. So, this stage is very crucial in the development of the Bible. So, the original languages of the Bible were Hebrew and Aramaic for the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, and Koine Greek, the common lingua franca of the Greco-Roman world for the New Testament. And the first translation of the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament was the Greek translation, the Septuagint, which is known for its abbreviated word symbol LXX, which is 70. Now, we'll talk about this in the future videos. And the first translation of the Old Testament into Greek or Septuagint was the Torah. So the Torah was the first to be translated into Greek from the Hebrew. And then the other Hebrew or Old Testament books followed to be translated into Greek. So the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, were the first to be translated into Greek. Now, like I said earlier, the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible was written in in Hebrew and Aramaic. The Aramaic, some of the books were written in Aramaic, but most of them were written in Hebrew. So the translation stage began with translating the Old Testament books into Greek. Because the New Testament was written in Greek itself, we'll come to it in the next explanation. We'll talk about how the New Testament was translated into a different language. So now after the translation stage, we come to the revision stage. What do we mean by that? Revising the old Greek or the Septuagint translation of the Old Testament into other versions, let's say updated version of the Greek translation. So now these translations don't exist in their exact form, but we have them in fragments. So they are lost and only survived in fragments in Christian documents, commentaries, and sermons. These include, I will just give you an example because you have to do a lot of reading. An example could be the Theodosian, Aquila, and Symmachus. These are the different updated versions of the Old Greek. That's the revision stage. Then translation stage 2, we come to translation stage 2. That is reproducing the Bible in other languages. So apart from translating the Hebrew Bible into Greek, now we move to another stage where the Hebrew Bible is not only into Greek but into other languages. Now we have Jerome's Latin Vulgate, so the Latin translation, and then we have the Syriac Peshta, that is a common translation of the Hebrew Bible into Syriac language, and then we have the Aramaic Targums, that is a translation of the Hebrew Bible. Scholars say the Targums are paraphrased form of translation of the Hebrew Bible. So these are the stages in the development of the Bible that you read today. So what do you learn out of this? Let me summarize this. So it is important to note that each stage in the development of the Bible involved human processes, including oral transmission, manual copying, and translation. Don't forget that. The existence of numerous manuscripts with variations highlights the challenges of accurately preserving the original texts over time. Scholars engage in textual criticism to reconstruct the most reliable versions of the Bible texts. That's why today we have hundreds of Bible versions, and even the Greek and the Hebrew translation of the Bible keep being updated because of a lot of study being done to reconstruct the most reliable texts of the Bible. So it is good to appreciate the human involvement in the development of the Bible. More than that, it is very important to know the different stages of the development of the Bible. This will lead you to appreciate the Bible because it has a wonderful story, a wonderful background, a wonderful history. Thank you for listening. In the next video, I'll try to come with reflections on text criticism, where I will explain about the original autographs and the copies of the manuscript. The copies of the Bible, the different manuscripts that we have today. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye for today.